Okay, if any of you have been following along, which I assume somebody, I don't know, maybe you have. We have gone through the book of Jonah. It's taken quite a while. And we completed the very last two verses last Sunday night. And I've kind of left some bait dangling to try to keep you interested. And to bring this thing together so that, I don't know, I'm hoping this puts a nail in it and finalizes it and brings some of the loose ends together. I had intentionally was somewhat vague on a few things, and I'm hoping to get those loose ends tied up tonight. And actually, I've got enough notes here. I don't know if I can get through all of it tonight, so don't be surprised by that. Of course, don't be mad either, but anyway. If you recall, somebody tore Jonah out of my Bible, and I don't know where it's at. I can't find it anymore. Okay, there it is. A lot of the book of Jonah, this is one of those very neat situations where I believe fully, wholeheartedly, that there was once a man named Jonah. And I believe that this is a description of a period of time in his life. And I believe that it's wholly accurate and trustworthy. And at the same time, do you ever wonder why we get Jonah and this 4 chapters of this particular period of time in his life versus why not Jonah's best friend versus why not the guy across the street, whoever else? Why did God want this particular story, these 4 chapters, in His holy word? And so there are the truths on the surface level that this man existed. He lived. He's a prophet. He ran from God. He disobeyed when he got the word to go to a particular place. And it's believed that the place was non-Jewish. And so, there was some, maybe call it racism or whatever it was. He didn't want to see some non-Jews be reached with the truth of who his God is. So he runs. And we studied all of this. We went all the way through all these details. And we brought it down to last week, the last 2 verses. And the story, I said this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've said it a couple of times. On the surface, when you get to the end here, I can only imagine many people getting to this point and thinking, really? That's it? That's how this book ends? I mean, I'm a very imaginative person. I can see things when I read them. And I see him sitting on this hill, and I see him building this booth over his head, and I see this gourd, this whatever this thing was, and producing a vine, and it gives him some shade for a time, and then a worm comes and dives into it, starts eating away at it, and it kills it. And I can picture all these things. I can see them happening. And then that's it. He's talking to God. Those last 2 verses, then said the Lord, thou hast had pity on the gourd. So Jonah's sitting there mad. He's upset because this plant, gourd, there's a lot of discrepancy in the translation of that Hebrew word, for which thou hast not labored, neither made it grow. So in other words, you had nothing to do with it. You didn't contribute. Your hands didn't get dirty. God just simply made this thing grow. It brought you some shade, so you were thrilled. And when the worm came and ate of it, it perished. And we mentioned how it specifically says there in the last part of verse 10, came up in the night, perished in the night. And then verse 11, and should not I spare Nineveh, that great city wherein are more than 64,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also much cattle. And So I'm looking at Jonah. I see him in my mind's eye, and he's up there. He's mad. He's pouting because the sun is beating down on him, and there's a strong east wind that we've talked about. And he's mad. I mean, I kind of think it's important to see this. If you can, here's this prophet of God. He's just had maybe the greatest revival in all of history of taking the good news to these people, and the whole entire city repented. And he's up on the hillside pouting because, first of all, they repented and God's not going to destroy them. And second of all, this thing, this plant that existed for 24 hours, it shot up, it gave him some shade, and now it's dead and gone. And out of all the things going on in life, he's upset about that. The plant, the gourd. That's what he's upset about. And I just, again, just on the surface, this is a little bit of an anticlimactic ending, and you just kind of scratch your head and say, you know, the movie's about Titanic, and it's a really big deal, and they hit the glacier, and it cut a hole in the side, and it sank, and, you know, can you imagine covering that story as a reporter and not talking about the people that survived? Would that escape you? Would you just talk about the boat that went down? I mean, that's what he's doing. He's upset about this plant rather than celebrating this massive revival that's taken place. And to put it in perspective, to remind you, this is a Jew mad that Gentiles, this massive city full of Gentiles, they have all repented. So what you have when you start to dig, when you start to get underneath the surface of this story, you start to see where different people, like the name Jonah, he represents something more than just one single man. He is one single man. He did live this life. But the message that we're to get from this is beyond the surface. Jonah has actually been pictured in several ways throughout the book. He's been pictured as Christ and his work and Israel. Now here at the very end, this is a picture of Israel, meaning the people, Jewish people. Their history is this display. What we are to understand or see here in this moment is an object lesson. And it's God giving Jonah the lesson, but it's him living it out and then recording it. Whoever recorded it, I think it was him, but whoever recorded it, it wasn't just so we would have this imagination of seeing a man sitting on a hillside pouting about a bunch of people being saved. There's more to it than that. It's deeper than that. And so God's giving him a lesson. He's living it out, but it's being recorded so that we can know the truths, we can know the facts of it, but we can dig in. We can dive in and we can find the deeper message for all of us to see. Backing up to the first 3 verses in chapter 4, Jonah's angry. He's angry that the Gentiles have repented, and he had a different outcome in mind for them. He wanted to see their destruction. In verse 4, now a lot of these things that are in King James, they don't line up perfectly with the Young's literal translation that I've been using because it points to something, and we'll get to that in a minute. But in verse 4 in King James it says, "Then said the Lord, doest thou well to be angry?" And just a little bit better translation would be this: "Is doing good a reason for you to be furious?" The people did good in the sense they repented. God's doing good in the sense that He's not destroying them. He's allowing them to repent. And both of those things, as a whole, are making Jonah mad. They're making him angry. And so God says, okay, I'm going to get this message across to you one way or another. And, you know, I feel like this is God talking to me sometimes because I require sort of that basic ABC kindergarten level lesson. I require that many oftentimes because I'm not a super intellect. And so this works really well for me. Maybe that's why I can see it so clearly. God says to Jonah, okay, I'm going to wake you up. I'm going to give you something to help open your eyes so you can perceive what it is that has just taken place. And it is a snapshot of the history of not just Jonah himself, but again, Jonah representing the nation of Israel. If you remember, where is he? He's out on the east side of the city. We talked about that. This is the place of exile. When Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, they went east. It is the place of wandering. When Moses, through the power of God, brought the Hebrew children out of Egypt, they went east. So it's a place of wandering. Many oftentimes it's a place of disobedience. You've disobeyed God, you find yourself in the east. You find yourself in a place where you may even, destruction's a harsh word there maybe, but something pretty negative is likely to happen in that state, in that place outside of God's will. You've disobeyed, you've been cast out to the east. We know that all mankind comes from Adam. That's where it started. In the exile, what happened? What happened? What changed? What's the biggest, most important part of the change when Adam sinned? He is put into exile. He leaves the garden. He is set out to the east. All those sound like really big, serious things. But what's even more important than all of that? The separation from God Almighty Himself. There's now sin between Adam and God. And so this position of being in the east represents a position, a place of exile, a place of being separated from God. And at that point, it didn't matter if you were a Jew or not. So Jonah is on the east side. He's in a place of exile. He's in a place of disobedience. And he builds something. And the word there in the original Hebrew, it's a strange word. And what this lines up with, if you've ever studied booths, B-O-O-T-H-S, in the Bible, the people visiting Jerusalem to have somewhere to stay would temporarily construct this thing called a booth. And that's the easiest English word for you and I to catch the meaning. But another English word would be tabernacle. So this same Hebrew word is many oftentimes translated tabernacle. And it's just simply a dwelling place. Abraham, we know as part of his story, when he's brought into Canaan by God, he's led there. He lives there as a pilgrim. Isaac, the same thing. Even Israel. As a part of them establishing themselves, they're in a place that's not home. They're, at that point in time, it's a temporary residence. It's almost, I kind of picture a tent. Something very simple and easy to put up. But I doubt that they used tent-like material. They had probably sticks and whatever, maybe vines and other types of things like that. Things closer to nature probably than what we use today. So Canaan as a land, way back when Abraham first goes there, and Israel and all those people, they develop it. They build homes eventually, and it finally does turn into a place of protection eventually. But that is, so it has these steps where it starts out temporary and there's a booth. And so the reflection here now is an understanding that this is something from our heritage, this building of a booth, this temporary structure, this dwelling place. It's something that we know from our history, something that we can return back to in a time of need, and that's where he was at that moment. Well, what do we also know about these people? They eventually wound up in Egypt, and you know the story. We don't have to go through all of that with Joseph and so on. But what we do know, especially about that, is the first time in history where they as a people group intentionally separate themselves. Anybody remember the name of that? Starts with a G, rhymes with ocean. Goshen. That doesn't sound familiar to anybody. That was the name of the place where they lived. So it was a way of them being separate from the large existence of the Egyptians. It was like they had their own home, basically. And it was some safety involved, and they weren't overrun by because you may or may not know, Egypt represents the world system, and so there was a border between the world system and these Hebrew slaves, which they weren't slaves immediately, but anyway. So they could live on the border of the world, but not intermingle or intermix with the world. The world could happen around them without touching them. And this is what Jonah has done. He's returned himself by the building of the booth. The word in Hebrew is spelled S-U-K-K-A-H. I'm not even going to pretend to know how to pronounce it. But the point is, he has taken himself virtually all the way back in time to, again, this point where they're separated from the world. And what I want you to see there is the mindset, the mentality. So in Egypt, to be separated in Goshen, it was actually a good thing for a lot of reasons. For safety and for, Jesus fussed at the Pharisees about the way that they perceived the laws, right? And we know today that there's this very difficult balance with living in the world and having the ability to interact with those that are lost. But you also have to have some rules, some kind of barrier that keeps you safe from slipping off into some kind of a sin and doing something you shouldn't do. So you have to be able to intermingle with the world somehow. Well, see, they hadn't grasped that yet, and they still haven't today. That's the problem. That's what Jonah's picturing for us. He went through the city because he was finally convinced, you're going to do this. And he does that, but he immediately removes himself. He immediately comes outside the city, builds a booth, and he's putting himself right back in that same old Jewish mindset, be ye separate, but in the wrong way. That's the problem. It's his heart. He's doing it in the wrong way. So you're getting this picture by using all these words that draw these parallels back to that time. Okay, so, and I'm sorry if this is just the language here. You really have to think through this. In verse 6, we talked about it when we studied verse 6, but it says the Lord God prepared a gourd there. And the idea is the fact that it's Lord God in English, but in original Hebrew it's Jehovah Elohim. And what you find out there, anytime you use those two together, one means God of relationship, the other one means God creator. In both cases it means God, but there is a distinct difference. There is God that just simply created things, Genesis 1:1, but then very soon after you get Jehovah Elohim, where He's created man and He wants a relationship with man. Well, that's who, in this verse 6, that's who prepared this. King James word is gourd, whatever it was that He prepared. Well, what that stands for, what that represents, is the law of Moses. And it might take a minute for me to convince you of that, but if you'll hang with me, I think you'll see this the way that I do. God prepared the law, and He gave it to Moses in around Exodus 20, right? He's up on the mountain, and you know the story. Nonetheless, this was God preparing the Ten Commandments and giving them to Moses. Here now, in Jonah, God has prepared this word that's translated gourd in King James, but there's a lot of discrepancy of what that word actually should be translated as. It makes sense to be some kind of a plant, some kind of a vine. That makes sense. But keep in mind, when you see the word gourd in King James, or plant or vine, whatever you have in your translation, Keep in mind, law of Moses, prepared by God. Not prepared by man. Man didn't do anything to make this happen, right? Jonah didn't make the gourd happen. Man didn't make the Ten Commandments happen. God prepared both of them. The importance of having both terms, Jehovah Elohim, it's very important. God is both Lord, again, the one who wants relationship with man. This is covenant God, but then He's also Creator God. Both cases He's God, but this is the work of God to establish, to create the Ten Commandments, or in this case the gourd. He is Creator God, relationship God, so He makes these things. And they both have a similar outcome. The parallels are unbelievable. I'm going to try to get these out of my mouth to your ears, hopefully, but this gourd provided a temporary cover or protection before the worm ate it, devoured it, and caused it to go away. The Ten Commandments also provide a protection for the Jews. They were provided by Jehovah Elohim, Lord God. And again, the fact that that title specifically is being used in this verse, saying that He is the one that provided this temporary protection, this gourd. He's the one that did that. It helps to put these things together, to tie this back to Exodus and to see the thing that God made there as a protection for His people. Now, I don't know if you remember this, because I kind of find it difficult to get this across, but that word is the word translated gourd. It is so rarely used. It's hard to find the meaning to this word. And there's one place that says that there's something about the root word, I'm talking about the Hebrew, the original Hebrew word, there's something about it that puts in your mind the idea of vomiting. Now I know that's hard to hear, I hate even saying that, but there's a point, trust me. So, God has a goal, and He's trying to help bring out in the mind of, here in this story in Jonah, but also in the minds of all Jews, He wants to help them understand there's a process of being restored. And what you find is in God's calculus, in His mind, in His reasoning and thinking, He's creating something to give protection. Again, talking about the Ten Commandments and the whole group of Israel, Jews, and now here, Jonah and this plant. But look at what God says in Leviticus. Turn to Leviticus 18:5. And I just want to make sure that you all know that I'm not just on some bad medication here. This is biblical stuff here. Leviticus chapter 18, verse number 5. Leviticus 18:5. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. I am the Lord. Paul, in Romans chapter 10, gives us this same confidence in the fulfilling of the law. But it has to be explained that this was a temporary measure. It was never meant to be a permanent fixture. It was a temporary guardian. Like the plant, it was a temporary protection or guardian for Israel. Look in Galatians 3. Again, just to show you, this was temporary. Galatians chapter 3, 23 to 25. Galatians 3:23. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up under the faith which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. And that word schoolmaster could also be translated guardian. So again, the point is, it was temporary. It was only given temporarily just like the plant, for one day, for 24 hours, the law was given to the land of Israel, to the Jews. Somebody keeps hiding the book of Jonah, and I'm going to have to do something better to keep my place. But anyway, so here's this word, again translated vine, plant, gourd, whatever the case. This was temporarily Jonah's guardian. Temporarily his guardian, just like the law was temporarily the guardian of the people of Israel. And somehow, even today, they sort of have it meaning more than that. They have it built up that it's more than just a temporary guardian. Okay. So, now, the next part mentions the idea of shade, that the temporary protection, the gourd, and if you remember when we studied this verse, verse 7, I still don't know that I have a complete, full understanding of why it happens this way, but he built a booth for protection. But yet now somehow this gourd provides protection. So in my mind, I'm seeing two layers of protection, but anyway, I haven't come to the bottom of that one yet, but he's got the protection of the booth and the plant. It's temporary. It comes, it goes in 24 hours. But you have here mentioned very specifically, and it's a word that's translated shade. It's in both, or shadow, it's in both 5 and 6. And the idea, and of course it sort of just happened in this moment. So the idea that Israel has figured out a way to build a particular shade with their own hands, with their own physical strength and understanding, their own intellect, versus the shade, the protection, the guardianship provided by God himself. I don't know why I didn't already have that, but that just kind of came to me in that very moment. Live, right here on Facebook Live. Okay. So they had the ability to build one for themselves, just as Jonah did, a booth in his case, but yet here comes God with another one, not built with human hands. He's on the east. He's in the place of exile, the place of judgment. Okay, that vine growing up was never meant to last. It's a plant. How long could it possibly last? Especially in those conditions, in that environment. When you kind of think about the place where he's at. He's up kind of on a hill. There's a strong wind, heat, whatever, all these things. It's a miracle that it grew at all in the first place. But it was meant to be temporary, and it comes to an end. And the end is brought about by the worm. Another interesting word in the Hebrew language. It's actually the word Tola. However you pronounce it, I don't know. So the question then is, what is greater? The temporary protection provided by God, the gourd, the plant, the vine, whatever that was, or the worm? Which one is greater? Which one provides more shadow, more shading, more protection? And now we're talking about the idea of something that's long-lasting, something that's eternal. What could I be talking about? Anybody have a guess? Who is our everlasting guardian and protector? Jesus Christ. Exactly. Thank you, Greg. The only one willing to chime in. Here's the thing. If you study the Bible, you cannot help but find Jesus on every single page. He's there everywhere. Specifically in Psalm 22, where David writes, you can turn, I can just tell you, but specifically you have this same Hebrew word, and David says, but I am a worm and no man. Well, the interesting thing is that 22nd Psalm, some of you may know, that's a description of Jesus Christ. Very, very clearly. Look that up and read that later. Like I said, you'll find the word worm. You'll find that same Hebrew word Tola in that description in Psalm 22 describing Jesus Christ. Here is a quote from Henry Morris, and I really like this a lot. You have to listen closely, but this makes a lot of fantastic sense here. When the female of the scarlet worm species was ready to give birth to her young, she would attach her body to the trunk of a tree, fixing herself so firmly and permanently that she'd never leave again. The eggs deposited beneath her body were protected until the larvae were hatched and able to enter their own life cycle. As the mother died, listen to this, the crimson fluid stained her body and the surrounding wood. From the dead bodies of such female scarlet worms, the commercial scarlet dyes of antiquity were extracted. What a picture this gives of Christ dying on the tree, shedding his precious blood that he might bring many sons unto glory. He died for us that we might live through him. That's Henry Morris. Again, I have an imagination, and I see a worm attaching itself to a tree. I see the worm depositing those eggs, and they're protected because they're somehow her body is conformed to the tree, and the eggs are between her and the tree. I mean, nothing can get these eggs without taking her out. Well, if you remember, let's see, in verse 7 where it says, "But God prepared a worm," it's not in King James, but if you remember, I specifically told you in the original language, there is a "the" missing in the English. That's not there. It's there in Hebrew. It's not there in the King James. It's not just God who prepared the worm. It is the God. The personal God. He personally attended to the preparation of the body for Christ to dwell in and accomplish his work. Look in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to read 5 to 7. Hebrews 10, 5, 6, and 7. "Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, Sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body hast thou prepared me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin thou hast had no pleasure. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do thy will, O God." So what you have here is God preparing a worm. And it has, and we talked about this over and over and over again, where God made an appointment. He appointed something. He made it. He prepared it. The worm is on that list. One of the things that God made an appointment for this worm. And it had a specific work to carry out. But when? When was it supposed to carry out its work? And in verse 8 it says, "And it came to pass, when the sun did arise, God prepared a vehement east wind." What you have here is the understanding, well, back up to verse 7, "But God prepared a worm when the morning rose the next day, and it smote the gourd that it withered." What do we know about Jesus Christ rising from the dead? He specifically, it's mentioned throughout the Gospels, that it was in the earliest dawn, before the actual sunrise. The resurrection of Christ is seen throughout the Gospels. Matthew tells us that the women went to the tomb as the day began to dawn. In the book of John, it says it was still dark. Christ's work was finished. The work on the cross was finished. But when did we know that it was proven? When do we know that it was received by God, that the plan was fulfilled? The proof was in the resurrection. What happened when Jesus Christ came, lived a perfect life, died on the cross, buried in a borrowed tomb, and rose back unto life? He struck a blow to the law. What did he tell everybody at some point about the law? That he didn't come to do away with it. He was going to fulfill it. Every jot and tittle. So from that moment on, only judgment can result from keeping oneself attached to the law. At this point in history, all the law is for is to be used for judgment. That's all it's used for. In other words, it's only used on those that are lost. When they go to heaven one day and stand before the righteous judge, he's going to break out the Ten Commandments and say, nope, you were a liar, you were a thief, you killed. That's the only time the law is ever used ever again. He struck the blow to the law for those that were saved. We don't need the law anymore. He defeated the role of the law for the believer. So, I hate going back to this, but that word that kind of translates to the word vomit, I hate even saying that. It's always considered a negative event until when? When is it not a negative event? Here in this story of Jonah. When was it not negative? When the whale, when the fish vomited him out. That was bringing forth life, right? Somebody that was understood to be dead at sea is now being brought forth back unto life. So in that one case, we're seeing almost the same parallel to the idea of Jesus Christ defeating death and being resurrected. The cave, cave, grave, whatever you want to call it, it could not hold on to Christ. So that's where this word ties in with what happened to Jesus Christ. That place where he was temporarily buried, you almost have to use that same word. It means vomit. It couldn't hold him. It had to open and release him. I'm going to try not to say that word anymore. I don't know why. It's disgusting. So, all right. The law, it still holds on to only those that hold on to it. It's no longer something that has the power to bring someone to God. As a matter of fact, Paul says, I didn't even know I was, what did he say? He was talking about the commandment not to covet. He says, I didn't even know I was breaking that law until somebody told me it was a law. I didn't even know I was guilty of that. Peter, in regard to false teachers, his book speaks against those that speak against the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ in the sense that they want to continue to hold on to the law. And I lied to you. I said I wouldn't say this word again. But he points to those wanting to hold on to the law. He says they're like dogs wanting to return to there. I'm not even going to say it because you know what it is. And what is the result of those clinging to the law? It is used to judge them. That's it. That's all it's used for now, today. The next part of this, I don't know how much. Yeah, I think I want to stop there just because I don't want to rush this, and I've already said a lot for you to digest. The next thing to go into is the east wind. Who is it that prepared that? And once again, it's not just God, it's the God. So, like I said, I've already given you so much. I'm going to stop there and pick up there next time. Okay, we'll start talking about the east wind next time, and we'll officially get done for sure next time with tying all this together. And does any of that make any sense to anybody? Have I swayed anyone or convinced anyone of what I'm saying or where I'm going with this? Kind of, some, a little bit, maybe none. Anybody? It's deep, I guess. But I don't think that you can ignore it. I think it's so obvious. Okay, let's do some prayer requests.